Today's video focuses on painting a realistic mouth and a set of bottom teeth for this lovely otter. Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Paul Hopkinson, a professional wildlife artist and an online art tutor. Do explore my channel later. I have lots more videos for you to enjoy. But for now we need to give this otter a set of teeth for eating his tea. I usually paint animal mouths in sections, and they can be very complex with lots of different elements and textures. I tend to find that focusing on one small part at a time ensures my eyes are looking carefully at the fine, specific details. This then reflects in my painting, which remains as realistic as possible. So for the otter, I begin by applying the base washes of colour first of all, and these are watery in consistency. But you've got to really look at the kind of tonal values when you do this as well. So when you're looking around the jaw in this case, look at the shapes that you can see within them very pale tones. So when you look at that reference photograph, really pinch in deep and look behind the fur, look deep into that mouth. And you should be able to pick out some of the background colours. So basically what's happening behind stages, so to speak. Now I've already got a very watery mixture of raw sienna, burnt sienna and burnt umber for the mouth area. So I've already got that ready to go. And this is something you need to make sure of before you start on a painting. So get your colours ready to go. Plan those colours out as well beforehand. Right, so remember to do some testing beforehand as well. So test the colours out on some scrap pieces of watercolour paper, preferably the same make as the one that you're doing your current painting on. It's very important as well to start with your lightest colours first. This then enables you to fine tune those shapes, tones and the colours as well. Now, as previously mentioned, you can see when I'm working on this mouth to begin with, I'm trying to go for the lightest colours first of all. And by doing so, you can gradually build up the layers as you go along. So don't go too dark too quick, because it's very difficult to kind of fix a mistake if you make one then. So just take your time with this. Try and plan it out as well while you're doing this. So working with a very kind of pinky pale, alizarin crimson sort of feel colour, then gradually start to build up those layers as you go along. So I'm trying to kind of map out the sections first of all really. And I tend to do this just by gradually building up those layers. So working with colours such as Scarlet Lake, as I say, alizarin crimson, but try and keep it nice and pale. A little bit of blue, because we don't want it too red in there. It can look like it's got blood in his mouth. We don't want that. So we want to have more like a purpley hue towards it. But more kind of on the sort of pinky red side. You know what I mean? So that's what we're looking for. So initially, when I'm looking around the jawline, I'm trying to think about the overall shape of the jaw while I'm looking at this. So plan it carefully. Think about the overall background shapes that you can see behind all of those details. To start to build the different sections within the mouth, I wet it again, allowing the water to soak in, which will then give me longer working times as well. So having a little bit longer to work so the paper stays wetter, that little bit longer, giving you a little bit more time to kind of sort of fine tune all the shapes behind the scenes. Then once you start getting those basic washes on, you can then go in a little more precisely with specific colours. So let's say a small amount of watery alizarin crimson underneath the teeth, and then maybe a tiny amount of intense or phthalo blue mixed in with that to give me that, as I said earlier, a little bit of a purpley kind of feel to it. So it's where it starts to kind of define the jaw shape as well. So I'm looking around the left hand side of the jaw, gradually increasing the colours. So it's not just the amount of colours we're using, it's also the consistency of those colours. So as I say, I always start off lightest first, so very watery. Now I've gone to more of a kind of a milky feel to the colours. And by doing so, the colours are going to get darker. Same colours, no different. So the colours are going to get gradually darker. But by working on one small section at a time, you can slowly sort of form that one area. So don't try and do one whole section in one go. Do small areas at a time, and that means you've got that little bit more control over it as well. It's also very important to keep looking at that reference photograph. I know it's something that I go on about quite a lot, but that's because it's quite important. It really is very important, because every few seconds you look backward and forward at that reference photograph, then you tend to remember more what you're looking at, you know? So you tend to remember some of the details and the areas you're trying to concentrate on. So working in pale layers allows kind of finer adjustments as well throughout the painting process you find. So you see, working on the bottom of the jaw and working around the bottom side of that and gradually creating the background overall shape, just using it's like a size 1 brush really. But each time I'm dropping a little bit more colour and I'm going to blend that out gradually each time. So now I'm going to go in with a damp clean brush and then gradually blend that colour out. Now when you look really deep into the back of the mouth, yes, it's very dark there, isn't it? But we don't want to make it too dark too quick again. So the first thing we want to do is get a little bit of a brown colour in the back there. Just kind of tint it really. Get a bit of colour in there, seal that paper in that little bit more. At least that way when you start adding the dark layers on, it's not going to look too flat. And also, if we decide to sort of lift some colour off in the background, just to show some of that background colour, such as this brown once it's dry, then that will show through, giving a hint of colour behind the scenes, so to speak, so we can gradually darken that as we go along. Now just remember that all of these foundation washes will be there for me to kind of build on top of with all my details later on. If you're enjoying the video and finding it very useful, could you please click on that thumbs up icon? The simple action is enough to help grow my channel. Thank you. I'm constantly sort of intensifying the colours with additional layers. At the same time, this builds the depth of colour gradually. Now the process of applying washes in layers is known as glazing, and it's a good way of creating darker colours with a watery medium, such as watercolour of course. For the teeth, think carefully about each individual tooth. I work one tooth at a time and drop in a little bit of raw sienna, then focusing it on the right hand edge to define more the shapes of the tooth before blending the colour across the surface of each individual section. So think about the curve that you can see around that tooth, think about the shape. So it's going to be dark on both sides and gradually gets lighter towards the middle. This again is that first layer of colour. So it's just to sort of seal the paper and also start to define the shapes, the background curves within each individual tooth. So try doing it one at a time and not try and do them all at once, alright, anything like this. As you work on the edge of the left hand tooth, think about the way that the fur comes away from that area. Apply burnt umber in fine lines to kind of replicate that fur detail, but try not to have the lines too defined at this stage, as the fur is stuck together actually on the wet animal, isn't it? But you still want to be able to show these areas, show these different sections that we can see within the reference photograph. Then you want to work around the jaw with this darker detail, softening down those edges as needed. So don't get it too sharp to begin with, no really sharp edges, keep it nice and soft and subtle to begin with. We'll get sharper and more detailed as we go along. Now for the actual lip, try to work around the highlights and again keep them washes watery. Look carefully at the tonal differences within the mouth. Remember to soften them where needed as well, so don't make them too sharp just yet. So this is where you start to really think about the overall patterns that you can see. So again, we're not going to go too detailed just yet, but I want to try and get these different sections that we can see within the jawline. And this will gradually build up in sections. Remember what I said earlier on, try not to do too much of an area in one go. Work on one small area at a time. So you can see I've worked by defining one area of the jaw, the left hand side. And then I'm going to start working on the right hand side and start defining that area. So one area at a time instead of trying to do it all in one go. Because it can get quite, well, complicated as well as quite difficult to manage as well. Soften down to avoid hard edges as well as you change tones within the lips. You want one merging into the other really. Once your wash looks right, you can then intensify the colours with additional layers of the same colours if need be. You find that you can also vary those colours a little bit so it doesn't look all the same throughout the jawline. So add a little bit more red, a little bit more blue, even a little bit more brown within the area as well, just to kind of vary it as you go along. But even on the right hand side of the mouth here where it's quite red, isn't it? I'm still going to darken that in places as we go along. But you can see now we're starting to get some more colour within there. We're working more towards a sort of a milky consistency paint. Working with the alizarin crimson, working with the bright colours. And by doing so, we need to get them bright colours on the paper first of all. and then we can tone them down as we go along, just so they're not too bright and too, too red in this case. So working on the lower kind of gum line, I want to darken this slightly by intensifying that colour a little bit more, but also adding a touch more blue and even a little bit of brown to that mix as well. But remember to use the very tip of that brush. So when you load your brush, remember to load it in the paint in your mixing palette first of all. Roll it as you pull away up the side of the mixing palette. Dab it once or twice on some kitchen roll, and then you should have a fine point to kind of work on those little details we need to add in. You find even though the lip actually looks almost black, you've got to add that touch of brown as I mentioned to give it a richer and kind of less flat colour. And also, as I mentioned also, we don't want it looking too red. If you're new to my channel, you may not know that I release a video every single Friday. If you click on the subscribe button down below, followed by that bell icon, and the bell is the important bit by the way, YouTube will remind you when there's something new to watch. I tend to kind of gradually build up my detail bit by bit, kind of fine tuning, lifting off a little areas here and there as well, and also blending until I get the right sort of effect I'm after. I've even noticed as well how there's a touch of alizarin crimson and scarlet lake mix around the edges of those little teeth. So using that fine tip brush again, this is a size 00 brush, I really want to start to fine tune the top area of the teeth. And look at where that little tongue is as well. You can just see a little tiny tongue sticking out there, can't you? So it's nearly blobbing its tongue out at us. So just by defining just a suggestion of the tongue just about visible in the background, and then picking out, not literally, the teeth shapes as well as I'm going through the process. Just remember to work on the colours around those teeth to ensure their shape is actually correct as well when you're working on anything like this. So this is where I start to add more of a creamy consistency mix and gradually darken the colours as I go along as well. So really creamy, sticking with a kind of reddy browny mix, but more, as I say, more to a creamy consistency. That way we can start working on those very dark tones. But take your time with anything like this though, gradually build up those details as you go along, thinking about the overall layering that we're going through. I also want to allow some of the lighter colours to still show through, so don't cover up everything you've already done. That's something you've got to really try and avoid. A mix of burnt sienna, alizarin crimson will give a nice deep red feel for that lower lip, but also add a bit of scarlet lake into it too for kind of variations within the colour. Again, soften your edges with a clean, damp brush as you do this. Keep thinking about the overall shape that we're looking at within the jawline. You can see the way this is coming together now because I've been working on those individual sections one at a time. Now this looks a little bit too red at the moment, but remember, because I just mentioned I'm going to soften things down that little bit as well. By doing so you can just finely adjust that and just kind of, take a little bit of colour off, add a little bit more colour on. It's all about taking your time, working in smaller sections as you work through the process of painting this lovely otter's mouth. Now as you darken that jaw, just remember to do it in the direction the fur grows or goes. So look at those fine lines, really pinch into that reference photograph when you do this. At least that way you should be able to see all the details that you need to see deep into the recesses of those darkest areas of the mouth. Try not to simply fill those areas in, just add lots of lines close together in the right direction of course, and this will gradually build the colour and the texture you need to make the mouth looking a little bit more realistic. I tend to find when I'm working on small areas like this, I'll add the colour on, and I'll even, as I did mention earlier on, take some colour off. So sometimes I'll lift paint off to create even more highlights and even more detail within the darker parts of the fur on this otter. I know the fur is wet, so you have to remember that because it's wet, some of the fur will, or the fine lines will kind of sort of cling together like little V shapes. So I have to remember that when I'm working on it. So basically use a nearly dry brush at this point, so a nearly dry brush to add very fine details within the lower jaw. Actually, I'll tell you what, I've got a little video on how to paint fine lines. I'll pop a link in the top right hand corner for you. But you can see by allowing those colours underneath to still show through, you still get the feeling of shape really in the kind of recessed areas within the jawline. And that's what I'm trying to achieve. I just don't want to block it all in with colour. But I'm still working with those very fine lines. So barely loaded brush, remember, and vary the length of the lines as you do this as well, so don't make them too long. Also vary the thickness of the lines, that's also very important. And you find that, when you're starting to run out of paint on your brush, that's when you want to think about going to those lightest of areas, because that way you get the finest of marks with hardly any paint on that brush, and it works really well that way. For the mouth opening, you need to sort of fill it in with a brown colour, but work this in small marks so at least that way you can sort of control exactly how much and where the paint is applied. And also be careful, be careful not to paint out that tongue. We still want a bit of a tongue showing. Look, don't worry if you do, because we can always lift paint off and kind of reveal it back again, can't we? Just bring it back into the painting. And because it's our painting, we can do whatever we want to do with it by lifting paint off, putting paint on, and just moving it around and fine tuning as we go along. But this is also where we've got to go over with kind of a blacky brown again. So now we're getting even darker within the recesses, or deep dark recesses. What's in there nobody knows, of the mouth. So we're going to get really dark in there with browny black colour and add those little fine marks and keep them working very close together as you do so. Now with all of these details on, this is where you want to kind of stand back really and sort of reassess that painting and decide if you want to add more details, or even add more details by, as I said, taking paint off. Honestly, it works really well. So you can do it both ways. So stand back, go and make a cup of coffee or anything like that, then come back with fresh eyes, remember, and to look at that painting anew. At least that way around, you can actually decide if you want to add more colour in there, lift more paint off. Do you want to kind of darken those teeth a little bit more? So these are the questions you'll be asking yourself when you get to this stage. And trying to determine when it's time to kind of put that brush down and say, I think I'll call that completed. Then you need to kind of question yourself if you want to do that. I tend to find when I'm working on anything like this, if I find that I'm just sort of fiddling with my details and not really making much in the way of progress, then it's time for me to stop. And that's when I'll put a signature down the bottom as well and call it a day on the painting. Are there any other animal features you would like to see me paint? Now leave me a comment down below and I'll see what I can do for you. I'll see you in my next video to the right, which is about painting a whole otter. I'll see you there.